Okay, this is the drug use and abuse class for the 31st of March, 2020. We're gonna try to finish chapter 7 today. If we don't finish it today, we'll finish it on the 1st of April. No joke. Okay. Sorry, that was a bad joke. So this is where we left off last time. So this is where we're going to start off today. There are no limits into what people will do to get high. People do the dumbest things. People have been known to smoke aspirin, to chew dandelion roots, to drink gasoline, a concoction known as Montana Gin, where they put orange juice in gasoline, and of course it tastes pretty nasty, but I'm I'm sure they'll drink it just about anything. They drink rubbing alcohol, which is poison, and it'll make you blind if you're not careful. If you drink too much of it, they drink hydrogen peroxide. They put Anbesol, which is a topical anesthetic, in their eye to get high, and they will smoke toad secretions, as weird as all that sounds. Mortuaries have to watch their supplies of the fluid they use to embalm bodies. Formaldehyde, if you remember, formaldehyde is very similar to acetaldehyde. It's almost the same structure, has almost the same chemical structure. Acetaldehyde is what alcohol turns to in your stomach as it's being broken down. It turns into acetaldehyde. When inhaled, the substance acts as a depressant and a psychedelic, but it can also be used to manufacture other illicit drugs. When mixed with marijuana, the substance provides a PCP-like effect and is called clickers, clickums, fry, wet, or illy. Illy, what a weird word. Raid, Lysol, and mini hairsprays are sometimes used for their alcoholic content. I know they use hairspray. They put a can of hairspray in a gallon of water. It, down. That's what I was told in Chinley, anyway. So if you donate money to some of those individuals, they'll go buy it. They'll buy hairspray. They'll make themselves up a gallon of alcoholic beverage. Not sure what it tastes like. It probably tastes like the hairspray, but at least they're getting an alcohol buzz from it. Raid has been used to spray on marijuana to intensify the effects of the marijuana in a concoction known as Canaid. Kava is a plant found in the South Pacific and in South America. The root is crushed and a milky white exudate is extracted, which is drunk like alcohol. The drink is reputed to have similar effects as alcohol and acts as an anti-anxiety drug. Warning though, if you're out for a drink of kava, kava is made with saliva. It's especially made with female saliva. I don't know what female saliva has to do with making it better tasting, but that's what they do. It numbs your tongue and it numbs your lips. It tends to have a fairly unpleasant flavor, but that's the kava root. That's not the human saliva. In some Arab countries, camels are force-fed marijuana. After going through the camel's digestive process, the camel dung is smoked for its hashish content. They're removing the plant structure, and they are creating a pure hashish pile of dung. The bufo genus of toads produces a psychedelic substance from its pores as a defense mechanism from attack. The toads are sometimes milked, and the resulting substance is smeared on cigarettes and smoked for their psychedelic effect. I saw this in a movie one time. This guy I can't remember how he got the toad in his mouth, but somehow he got the toad in his mouth, and then he started having psychedelic episodes, as weird as that sounds. All natural medications started out as herbal preparations concocted by shamans, medicine men, wizards, or physicians. Some of these herbs merely had a placebo effect, while others have been proven to contain chemical structures that have great benefits for mankind, such as quinine, which comes from the bark of the cinchona tree, and we use it to fight malaria. Now, when we treat malaria with it, it works fairly well. This is something that if you have ever been stationed in uh, the rainforest, that they will give you quinine. That's what they gave us in Vietnam. But Colloquin is a drug is a drug that's made from quinine. Donald Trump has touted it as possibly a medication that will fight the coronavirus. There is no proof that this actually works. The research looking at it has not been all that favorable, but he has touted it over the last couple of weeks as a possible why he thinks he knows pharmaceuticals is beyond me, but he has touted this as a possible cure for coronavirus. Some people have tried it and some people have died, so be careful what you believe when Donald Trump is speaking. Search for the fountain of youth or merely drugs that will help the individual recover from a hard night of drinking have recently come to the fore as smart drugs, drinks, and nootropics. Smart drugs, drinks, and nootropics are drugs, nutrients, vitamins, extracts, herbal potions. I take ginseng every morning. I take ginkgo biloba as well. Caffeine and amino acids. So just about everything that you take to make yourself feel better has caffeine in it, oddly enough. 5 hour energy drinks. Almost all of your energy drinks have lots and lots of caffeine in them. And then, of course, amino acids. These drugs are reputed to boost your intelligence, to improve your memory, to sharpen attention, to increase concentration, to detoxify the body, to energize the user, to reverse the aging process. New age smart drugs or nootropics include hydrogene, selagiline, vasopressin, 5-HT, which is supposed to be serotonin, modafinil, paracetam, and oxiracetam. It's supposed to improve your memory or your learning, improve your memory consolidation, and improve your memory retrieval. Compulsive disorders are repetitive behaviors that the individual appears not to have any control over. They come in two categories: impulse control disorders, compulsive gambling, hair pulling are two examples of impulse control disorders. Compulsive disorders that have their own classification: overeating, shopping, sexual behavior, internet use, watching television, pathological lying, shoplifting, and fire setting. These are all compulsive disorders. Impulse control disorders are actions that may be pleasurable in the beginning, but as the attempt to resist the impulse continues, it becomes harmful to the individual or to others. This disorder also has accompanying tension or arousal before the act is committed. After culmination of the act, the individual often feels gratification, pleasure, relief, and then possibly remorse and guilt for not controlling the behavior. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a repetitive activity where the goal is to reduce anxiety or distress caused by obsessive thoughts. The goal is rarely to provide pleasure or gratification and include compulsive hand washing, checking things, ordering, counting, and praying. Compulsive behaviors are engaged in for the same reason people compulsively use addictive drugs. It gives them an instant rush. It allows them to forget their problems. They use it to control anxiety. They do it to oblige their friends, and they use it to self-medicate. These individuals are trying to alter their mood and change their state of consciousness. MRIs show that the same areas of the brain are activated when compulsive behavior is done as when drug use is anticipated or done. So the part of your brain that is lighting up because you are using a select drug is the same area of your brain that's lighting up when you do these compulsive acts, as amazing as that is. Drug users are compulsive about their drug use. They develop a tolerance for their drug. They have withdrawal symptoms after abstinence. They continue to use despite adverse consequences. They tend to be in denial about their usage. They have a strong tendency to relapse. If we look at compulsive gamblers gamble compulsively, just like the drug user uses the drug compulsively. They increase the bet amount when gambling compulsively. They build up a tolerance to the gambling, just like a drug user will. They become restless when not gambling, and of course, this is what happens when they're withdrawing from gambling. They are very similar to somebody who is withdrawing from a drug. They continue gambling until they have used all their money. Of course, they will abuse. This is a form of abuse. It's very similar to what happens with somebody who's gambling. They think they control their gambling and refuse to see the consequences. Of course, they are in denial. They can stop anytime they want to, just like somebody who is stuck on caffeine, somebody who's stuck on alcohol, somebody who is a smoker. They will relapse whenever they have money again, and of course, there is always a tendency to relapse. And this is one of the reasons why in most of the programs that try to help you get over your addiction, they tell you you can never go back. If you go back, then it'll just start a new cycle for you, and you'll use until you can't, until you're done. This is what happened to Robin Williams. This is one of the reasons he committed suicide. The other reason had to do with he relapsed, and he didn't want to go back to snorting cocaine. So that's one of the reasons he committed suicide. The other reason had to do with rapid onset Alzheimer's disease that he had been diagnosed with. One telling sign is that the organizations like Gamblers Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous use a 12-step program identical to the 12-step program set up for Alcoholics Anonymous. Addictive behavior involves a lack of individual control, and these organizations demonstrate the necessity to change their lifestyle and beliefs. Compulsive behavior can be triggered by various factors: genetic predisposition for compulsive behaviors, environmental stress, and the repetitive behavior itself can lead to doing the behavior over and over and over again. Substance abusers, compulsive gamblers, compulsive overeaters, and compulsive shoppers all show the same dopamine increase in the brain. So we have exactly the same areas in the brain that are lighting up for the drug addict as is lighting up for the compulsive gambler, the compulsive overeater, and the compulsive shopper. Compulsive behavior does seem to run in families. Binge overeating has been shown to have a relationship with overactive 5-HT serotonin receptors. The more of these receptor sites that you trigger, the happier the person is, and that is what makes them overeat. Twin studies support the strength of genetic factors leading to obesity. These connections were stronger than shared environmental pressures. Studies of adopted children supported the strength of genetic influences where such environmental factors as frequency and volume of meals, the amount of snack food in the house, and level of exercise was less significant than heredity toward obesity. And of course, this is a picture of a Catholic orphanage. Of course, it's talking about adoption studies. So I put up a picture of an orphanage. Interestingly, I used to live down the road from an orphanage. My mother would threaten to leave me there, which looked like a lot of fun because there were a lot of kids to play with, so that wouldn't have been so bad, I guess. Researchers have found a marker gene that shows a strong proclivity for the addictive behavior, especially alcoholism, and this is DRD2A1 allele. We've talked about it before. It appears in only 19 to 21% of non-alcoholics. So those of us out there that are not alcoholics, we probably do not have the DRD2A1 allele. However, severe alcoholics, 69% of them have the DRD2A1 allele. 45% of compulsive overeaters have this allele. 48% of smokers have this allele. 52% of cocaine addicts have this allele. 51% of pathological gamblers have it. 76% of pathological gamblers with drug problems have it. 45% of people with Tourette's syndrome have it. And 49% of children with ADHD have it. DRD2A1 allele. It is speculated that these individuals who have the DRD2A1 allele gene have a deficiency of dopamine receptor sites and therefore must seek excessive stimulation to force extra dopamine to be released in the reward reinforcement pathway to feel normal. Since their normal is less stimulating, they're bored all the time, stimulation allows them to feel pleasure that they do not otherwise feel. If you think of people, if you've ever been around people that have this problem, especially people with ADHD, you know that they're very easily bored. Compulsive gambling may be triggered by the plethora of venues to gamble, state lotteries, poker machines, internet betting, legal off-track betting, casinos on every corner. And of course, in Arizona, most of the casinos are owned by the tribes. Compulsive overeating may be triggered by the plethora of fast food restaurants, lack of daily physical activity, fats and sugars in the foods that induce craving, parents overfeeding their children, chaotic childhoods that lead people to use food to relieve their depression. Compulsive sexual activity may be triggered by a plethora of sexual situations depicted on television, latchkey kids with no supervision, children with no close emotional family connections, and abundance of internet pornography. Compulsive internet use may be triggered by expanding networks of games, massive multiplayer online role-playing games. Dedicated gamers will play online for an average of 8 hours a day, expanding networks of online gambling, and expanding network of chat rooms. Compulsive shopping may be triggered by the ease of getting credit, the materialistic view of life. It isn't who you are, but what you have. Barrage of advertisements on TV, catalogs, 24-hour home shopping networks, internet shopping, internet auction sites. I went to an elite school in Indiana. People don't think of Indiana as being elite, but this was an elite school, and there were a bunch of fairly rich kids. One kid was the grandson of the man who invented Listerine, and this kid had tons and tons of bucks. He was pretty rich. He came to school with 2 cars. One of them was a Shelby Cobra, and the other was a Ferrari. Because he had 2 cars and he could only drive one, he allowed his roommate to have the other one. Actually, he gave it to him. And so here we had 2 kids, 2 individuals tooling around campus, one in a Shelby Cobra, which is a pretty hot-looking car, and the other was a Ferrari. I think he kept the Shelby Cobra because it was a little bit faster. What I'm talking about is some people are materialistic. He would tell you. Of course, I didn't know who the hell he was, but I had him in. He was sat beside me in one of my classes, and I didn't know who he was, and I didn't care. I was pretty poor at the time. As a matter of fact, I only had 1 pair of shoes and 2 pairs of underwear, by the way, but that's not important. That's another story. Anyway, so I sat beside this guy in class, and at first he didn't really talk to me because I wasn't in his fraternity. He was a Lambda Chi. But then he found out that I ran track, and he was trying to impress me, and he kept telling me about all the stuff that he had. The fact that he had a Ferrari, that he came to school that was Shelby Cobra, that he gave the Ferrari to his roommate. He told me all of this stuff, and of course, it didn't really impress me because I'm not materialistic, and that wasn't really important to me. What was important to me was passing the class and getting another pair of shoes. Actually, one of the great things about running track was that they gave you a pair of shoes. They gave you running flats to run in on the road, and that was kind of nice. So I had two pairs of shoes. And then after the season was over with, the next season they gave me another pair of shoes. So that then I had three pairs. Of course, my running shoes from the year before were kind of wearing out. Anyway, well, actually, I had four pairs. No, I had three pairs of shoes. The bottoms fell off of my boots, so I didn't have boots anymore. Anyway, that's sad to be poor, huh? It has been observed that there is a history of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse in the lives of many of the individuals who suffer from compulsive behaviors. Engaging in behavior can lead to compulsive behavior. Engaging in the behavior can lead to compulsive behavior. A big payday when gambling, eater takes in excess sugars and fats and changes his body chemistry. Now they can eat to be happy. Being able to buy something that the individual wants makes them shop with the anticipation that they will find another coveted item. Participation in ritualized masturbation, compulsive viewing of pornography, or participation in other compulsive sexual behaviors will make the individual avoid normal sex behavior or emotional relationships. And now, instead of trying to find somebody to get married to, this individual just goes home and masturbates. Compulsive gambling has skyrocketed in the last decade, with poker tournaments being shown on television and online gambling available. Last year, gambling revenues in the United States topped $75 billion. Last year, gambling revenues worldwide topped $125 billion. I looked this up just before I started this lecture, and the figures are still the same. When it says last year, it really means whenever they wrote the book. Or they first put it in the book. But I just looked it up, and these are all fairly accurate. Gamblers Anonymous defines gambling as any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, no matter how slight or insignificant, whether the outcome is uncertain or depends upon chance or skill, constitutes gambling. Forms of gambling: casino-style gambling, poker, blackjack, craps, roulette, slot machines, video poker machines, horse and dog racing, jai alai, which is a game that they play down in Florida. It's a South American game, a very, very fast game. Bingo and raffles, state-run lotteries and keno, sports betting, both legal and illegal, Super Bowl office pools of betting on golf, schoolyard games like lag pennies and flip coins, bar games like liar's dice, stock speculation such as day trading, commodities and options, and of course, internet gambling. Gambling has been around since the dawn of man. Gambling bones have been found in human habitation sites that date back 40,000 years. This is not an old world phenomenon. Mayan digs have found gambling implements that closely resemble the dice and the bones of other civilizations. Along with gambling has come attempts at prohibition. India prohibited gambling in 1000 BC. During the Roman Empire, it was only for the aristocracy. Louis IX of France in 1255 tried to ban gambling. Henry VIII of England tried to ban it. And of course, during the Victorian era in the United States, gambling became illegal in the United States. When I was young, it was illegal to gamble in any form whatsoever. It wasn't until the 80s that they started. Actually, it was in the 70s, in the 1970s, that they allowed gambling in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. I'm not exactly sure what Las Vegas was supposed to be before that, but it wasn't a gambling mecca. Gambling came to the United States with the British, but the corruption and the addictive behavior made the practice unpalatable, and it was banned in the United States. While it was banned in the East, as people moved across the Mississippi River, gambling was popular in the wild, wild West. Infected by the same corruption and Victorian morality, by 1910, it again was banned, even in the West. Gambling didn't return until the 1970s. Since then, Atlantic City and Las Vegas have become gambling meccas. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump used to own a casino in Atlantic City called the Taj Mahal. He lost his shirt. Somehow he lost his shirt. And this is one of the reasons why he hates American Indians. He hates Indians because your casinos pay out better than he can. And the reason he can't is because he wants to make a lot of money. So if you went to a casino that was owned by Donald Trump, then it was very unlikely that you were going to win very much money, or if at all, if any money at all. Indian casinos tend to pay off a little bit better. Indian casinos were allowed in the early 1980s, and since then, of course, many tribes have turned to gambling to make profits enough to take care of their tribes. 48 states have some form of gambling. The only two states that don't have gambling are the two Mormon states, Utah and Hawaii. Strangely enough, Hawaii has a large Mormon population. Not exactly sure how that happened. They must have sent missionaries over there, and they converted a lot of the people living in Hawaii to Mormonism. There's a Brigham Young University over there. Brigham Young, of course, is in Utah, but there's also a Brigham Young University in Hawaii. Compulsive gambling, like any other addiction, comes in two forms: problem gambling and pathological gambling. Problem gambling is gambling behavior that causes problems in an individual's life, either psychologically, physically, sociologically, or vocationally. Pathological gambling is gambling behavior that is persistent and continual, significantly disrupts all aspects of an individual's life. The real difference between problem and pathological gamblers is often time and money. Problem gamblers can't afford to spend as much time and don't have the money to gamble as they want. They average losses of about $3,000 per year. A pathological gambler spends far more time gambling and averages losses of $11,000 a year. The average debt for women entering Gamblers Anonymous is about $60,000. The average debt for men entering Gamblers Anonymous is $100,000. That's a lot of money. I don't make $100,000 a year, I can assure you. As a matter of fact, it takes me about 2 years to earn about $100,000. Studies show that the problem and pathological gamblers lose 10 to 20 times as much as non-problem gamblers. In a study in Connecticut, 47% of the casino patrons were problem or pathological gamblers, even though they only comprised 5% of the population of the people going to the casinos. The casino they're talking about is Foxwood, I think. It's owned by the Pequot tribe. It's the only gambling casino in Connecticut, or it was. I don't know if it still is. In Minnesota in 1993, it was discovered that 2% of the population generated 63% of the state gambling revenues. 2% of the population. Harvard Medical School studies estimated that 125 million people in the United States gamble. That's about a third of the population. It's about a third of the population. 2,200,000 of these individuals are pathological gamblers. 5,300,000 of these individuals are problem gamblers. This didn't take into account the 1,100,000 adolescent pathological gamblers. Male compulsive gamblers outnumber female compulsive gamblers by 2 to 3 times. This may be changing with the increase of casinos and slot machines, as women are more likely to use gambling to escape depression trauma, or relationship problems. Pathological gamblers tend to have other addictions. 25 to 63% of pathological gamblers have other behavioral or substance addictions. One study found that 73% of pathological gamblers had alcohol problems. The same study found that 38% of pathological gamblers had a drug problem. 60% of them smoked, 50% of them had mood disorders, 41% had anxiety disorders, and 60% had personality disorders. The group that has been seen the greatest rise of gambling is among older adults. One survey of residential and assisted care facilities found that 16% went to casinos at least once a month. This behavior is exacerbated by casino-sponsored trips and day trips, which were found in 2/3 of the facilities. It gives the older folks something to do. And of course, they've got their Social Security checks coming in, and we wouldn't want that money to go to waste. College students gamble at a higher percentage than any other group. 42% gamble, 26% gamble weekly or more frequently. Heavy college gamblers are more likely to be smokers, heavy drinkers, and or heavy marijuana users. These individuals averaged lower grades and more frequent absences, of course. Different types of gamblers. There are 3 different types that we're going to talk about: recreational social gamblers, professional gamblers, and antisocial gamblers. Recreational social gamblers are able to separate gambling from the rest of their lives. And these individuals just go to casinos for the fun of going to the casino. They'll take $20 into the gambling pit or whatever, and they will, as soon as they lose it, they quit. But there are some people that are professional gamblers. The individual that shot up Las Vegas, that individual was a professional gambler. He was said to have won as much as millions of dollars in any given year. He had been on a losing streak, and of course we're not exactly sure why he decided that he was going to pump bullets into that group of individuals that he shot up. It was a concert that he shot up. But he had been losing money lately. Sent his girlfriend away with, I think it was $10,000 or $100,000 to buy a house in the Philippines. For professional gamblers, their main source of income is gambling, and because of this, they are able and willing to take losses in their businesses. Obviously, this individual was not willing to take a loss. Something set him off, and he decided he was going to shoot. He was going to shoot a lot of people. Antisocial gamblers may steal to gamble and have no conscience about the thievery and the corruption that they represent, and those are antisocial gamblers. There are 2 subtypes of pathological and problem gamblers. Action-seeking gamblers are frenetic, excited, and are always seeking to escape. Escape-seeking gamblers are drawn to gambling machines and are often responsible people with good jobs, but they begin gambling to escape from their emotions or just to escape boredom. They are bored, so what else can you do except gamble? The symptoms of persistent recurrent pathological gambling: preoccupation with gambling, reliving past gambling experiences, planning future gambling. When I was up at Fort Belknap, a lot of the individuals were recovering alcoholics or recovered alcoholics. When you talk to them and they wanted to tell you a story, it was always a story about when they were drinking and what fun they had and how this situation was so funny. They didn't have any sober stories. All their stories were about drinking, as if drinking made everything so much better. Gamblers are the same way. They'll talk about how they won $10,000 or whatever. Increasing the amount of money used in gambling, unsuccessful attempts at stopping or curbing gambling, restlessness and irritability when not gambling, using gambling as an escape, chasing, which is trying to recoup your past losses, lying about gambling, financing gambling through illegal acts, jeopardizing jobs, relationships, and education to gamble, expecting others to bail out the gambler's debt. That's the part that drives me the craziest. Why in the world, if he owes money to somebody, why in the world does he think that I owe him, I should give him money? It just doesn't make any sense. Not only that, but they borrow the money from you, but they have no idea that of ever paying it back, as if because they're a gambler, they can take money from people, and the people have to give it to them. That just drives me crazy. Compulsive behaviors, winning phase. In the beginning, the bets are small and they are happy just to win or break even. But as recreation becomes compulsion, the reward becomes more the stimulation of the action, and they seek to prolong the action as long as they possibly can. Winning becomes secondary to staying in the game. They just want to keep gambling because they get such a charge from it. In 70 to 80% of the cases with compulsive gamblers, the beginning to their craving or gambling started with a big win. The gambler begins spending more time wagering, and their conversations are salted with lionizing their wins, and when mentioned, minimizing their losses. I had a friend up in Fort Belknap, kind of an interesting fella. He was married to a Navajo, interestingly enough, but he would go to the casino every night. I hired him to help me. I can't remember how much I was paying him. I think it was $100 a day. I think I was paying him $100 a day. So I would give him $100 at the end of the night, at the end of the day of work. We were remodeling my house. I used to own a house in Harlem, Montana, and we were fixing the walls. It was a rental house. I had allowed somebody, a renter, in there, and they had punched holes in the walls. There were holes all over the place, and we needed to go and we needed to fix the walls of the house. And there were other things. I needed to paint the house and whatnot. And he came and he worked with me every day, and he was a good worker and he was a good friend of mine. And so at the end of the day, I'd give him $100. And then the next morning, I'd pick him up and we'd go and eat breakfast. And I'd ask him, I'd drop him off at the casino, and then I'd pick him up the next morning and I'd ask him, well, how much money do you have left? And he would say, last night I won $300. I'd say, wow, that's great. So you've got $300. And he'd say, no, I lost it all. He would gamble. Any money that he had, he gambled until it was gone. It was just the oddest thing in the world. And we worked together for about a week. So I gave him like $700 in that week. And every morning I picked him up and he would say, I won $1,300. And I'd say, wow, that's great. So you got $1,300. Maybe you can buy. He didn't have a car, and and I'd say, well, maybe that's a good down payment on a car. And he would say, no, I lost it all last night. So every time he won, he would lose, but he wouldn't talk about how much money it cost him to lose. He made crafts, and he would say, well, I sold this drum for $30. So I made $30 today. And I'd ask him, well, how much did the materials cost? And he'd say, well, that's not important. He would just talk about how much money he made off of his crafts. He wouldn't talk about how much money his crafts actually cost him. So he couldn't understand the concept of negatives and positives. It just didn't register with him. Losing phase. The losing phase begins with a losing streak, which is inevitable due to the simple laws of chance. Their large losses are met with larger wages to try to wagers, that should be wagers, to try to recoup their previous losses. And this, of course, is known as chasing. We talked about that before. As a gambler continues to lose, they will dip into depression. They will seek isolation. They will become irritable, and they will lie about their situation. Kind of like my friend who lost his money every night. He didn't want to tell me that he lost all the money that I'd given him the night before. So I had to buy him breakfast, and I usually bought him lunch. Desperation phase. In the desperation phase, the pathological gambler may lose their job. They may max out their credit cards. They may borrow money from friends and family, perhaps turn to illegal activities to hide their addiction. They may steal, they may embezzle, they may turn to drug dealing. But as long as they're fulfilling their need to gamble, these things are not important. They will tell you, sure, I deal drugs, sure, I sell drugs to kids, but it's not important because I need to gamble. The gambler may bankrupt their family and suffer divorce, of course. Giving up phase. In the giving up phase, the gambler is no longer trying to recoup their losses, but seek the game to stay in the action. 72% of gamblers experience depression when they hit bottom. Suicide attempts occurred in 17 to 24 of these gamblers when bottom was hit. Now, this is one of the things that it's really important as far as gambling is concerned. You know, you don't worry about gamblers. They're really irritating because they're always trying to borrow money. You know, they're trying to get you to give them money because they'll never pay that money back ever. It doesn't register with them that it's like free money. They think all money is free because that's how they make money. They go to the gambling casino, and they people give them money, and that's the whole point. I mean, that's one of the reasons why my friend always talked about how much money he won, but he never talked about how much money he lost. The reality is, if he won $1,300, and he started out with $100, then he lost $1,400. That's the reality. But he would never talk like that. He would always claim that he had won the night before. He did. He won $1,300, and he lost $1,400. And of course, at the point when they're contemplating suicide, usually they're contemplating suicide because they don't have any money to bet. Now they can't get their rush. And since they can't get their rush, that's when they contemplate suicide. And this is when they seek treatment. For the compulsive gambler, it isn't the money that they're seeking, but the rush from the large win and the zoning out that gambling affords them. About 1/3 of compulsive gamblers recover on their own, usually triggered by devastating financial losses. For the other 2/3 who seek treatment, the techniques used include antidepressant medication, anti-craving drugs like naltrexone, and Gamblers Anonymous, which is that infamous 12-step program. Compulsive shoppers and hoarders have the same cravings as do gamblers and drug addicts, but in this, the high is caused by the feeling they get when they purchase an item. 74% of the time, compulsive buyers purchase items on impulse. 50% of the household income for these compulsive shoppers goes to paying their shopping debts. Compulsive shoppers tend to buy items that enhance their sense of uniqueness. Women will buy jewelry, they'll buy clothes, and they'll buy cosmetics. There was a Marcos's wife. I can't think of her name. Anyway, this is the Marcos was the guy that was the leader in the Philippines right after World War II. Imelda. Her name was Imelda. Anyway, and they spent money like they embezzled money from the government, and they spent money like it was water. They went into her closets, and they found an entire closet. It was a walk-in closet. The thing was full of shoes. Some of the shoes had never even been worn. They were still in the boxes, but she had thousands of shoes. It's kind of a joke. She was a compulsive buyer, a compulsive shopper, and shoes were her thing. Men buy high-tech electronics and sporting equipment, and women buy clothes, cosmetics, and jewelry. Depression seems to be the main impetus behind their compulsive shopping. Look Imelda Marcos up. Her name's spelled Imelda. Imelda, yeah, Imelda Marcos. Fascinating. They'll probably, the first thing you'll see is her closet full of shoes, and there were thousands in there, something like 2,400 or something. It seems worse during the winter holidays, so this is the time when they accrue 40% of their debt. Antidepressants reduce their surge to compulsive shop. It's kind of fun to be related to a compulsive shopper because they give you the greatest. They want to buy you the best Christmas presents. So you always get really nice stuff at Christmas time from these people. Collecting, accumulating, and hoarding are offshoots of compulsive shopping. The individuals gain self-worth and self-esteem from the objects that they own. These collectors and hoarders may buy valuable items, contemporary fads, or accumulate valueless items. There are cases of people who are unable to throw newspapers and magazines away. People are also, they will hoard animals, cats, dogs, and birds. This is a really serious problem in Montana. From time to time, they will, people that hoard animals will get caught with all these animals because usually they can't feed them, and they just keep accumulating them. They won't neuter their dogs or cats or whatever they're hoarding. There was a case of a person living in Alaska, and they were breeding collies, and they tried to cross from Canada into the United States in a semi, and that semi was full of collies. They had them all in cages. They had them stacked on top of each other. It was a shock to everybody when they started pulling the dogs out, that there were only 2 dead dogs in there. They had 119 dogs, 119 collies, and what they did was they charged them with animal abuse, and they were coming down to Arizona to breed collies. They're probably in Arizona today. Breeding collies. So if you've got a neighbor that breeds collies, maybe those are the people. They took all the dogs out to the state fairgrounds, and they housed them in the state fairgrounds. And it cost them thousands of dollars a day to feed these animals and to house them. They had to bring veterinarians in, and they gave them all away. And my wife and I signed up to get one of these collies, but we didn't. They didn't approve of our lifestyle. We were living on a farm at the time. We had 20 acres for the dog to run in, but we had 2 other dogs at the time, and they decided that we were not. They shouldn't do that. We have in Montana, there was an individual that was a hoarder of goats, and he had them all pinned in on this one property. It was about 40 acres, and he had like 250 goats. Of course, he died, and so nobody was feeding them, and there was no water. They ate everything. The place was denuded. They ate the baling twine off of the walls of the shed that they had there. They all died. All of them died, and of course the smell is what pulled people in to see what was going on. They had to bury all 250 of those goats. Another case, the goats. There was a case of a bird lady that had opened her. She had a trailer, and it was just full of birds. Of course, it was also full of bird manure. When I was working in the hospital in Omaha, we were called out one night. This lady's pile of newspapers had collapsed on her, and it had broken her leg. So we were called out to go pick her up. When we went in, she told us, or there were 2 people in the house. One was a famous lawyer from Omaha, and she was the one that had the broken leg. But she was hoarded newspapers and magazines, and they were stacked all over the place. And they were screaming at us not to mess up their piles. Don't touch any of the piles. Of course, one of them had collapsed on her. It was a pile of newspapers, and it was so heavy that it broke her leg. And of course, we took her in, and the smell was, you couldn't believe the smell. It wasn't the smell of newspapers, it wasn't the smell of magazines. She also had cats. And of course, the cats were using the newspapers as kitty litter. So the whole house reeked of old cat urine and old cat feces. It was just horrible. We had to, when we got to the emergency room, we dropped her off, and we smelled like cat urine. They threw the gurney out. They had to, because it was just there was the smell of cat urine and cat feces was all over it. Anyway, she was a famous lawyer from Omaha. She was teaching at one of the law schools in Nebraska at the time. She couldn't try any more cases. She couldn't go to court because the judges had gotten together and decided that she smelled so bad that they wouldn't allow her in their courtroom anymore, since she was a professional woman. Of course, if she had been one of the somebody's client, of course they wouldn't have thrown her out. But since she was supposed to be a professional woman, they were able to do that. Last I heard, she just wrote books. She was not working as a consulting lawyer. 1980, 15% of the adult population in the United States were considered obese. By 2005, 33% of the adult U.S. population were considered obese. Tragically, today, only 33% of the adult population are of normal weight. 2/3 of the people today are obese. This is in the United States. The average height of the U.S. female is 5'4", and they weigh 164 pounds. Of course, the people that we admire, the people that show us what clothes are supposed to look like on them, these are models in the United States. Their average height is 5'9", with a weight of 110 pounds. Well, let me show you the difference between the average female in the United States and the average model in the United States. 164 pounds, 5'4", 5'9", and 110. Look at the bones in her knees. She looks anorexic. And there we go again. And once again, you can see her knees, as god awful as that is. The lady on the right weighs 164 pounds. You can see her jeans, she's wearing too tight of jeans. Probably, we won't go into the rest of it, but you can see her zippers barely staying closed. Lady on the left, of course, weighs 164 pounds. And the lady on the right is not only anorexic, but she's 5'10", and she weighs 5'9", I'm sorry, and she weighs 110 pounds. There are 3 eating disorders: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Anorexia nervosa is body image distortion and an addiction to losing weight. Bulimia nervosa is eating excessive amounts of food and then controlling weight by purging, either by vomiting, fasting, or excessive exercise. And binge eating is bulimia without the vomiting, without the purging, actually. It's eating excessive amounts of food with no attempt at weight control. Compulsive eaters feel powerless when dealing with food. These individuals tend to be obsessed with food. They use food to escape desirable feelings, boredom, depression. They are secretive. They hide food around their houses for some unknown reason. They feel guilty about eating. They are in denial that they have this problem. They continue overeating behavior despite the harm that they are doing to themselves. Eating disorders seem to be a combination of genetic, neurochemical, psychological, developmental, and sociocultural factors. 9.3% of the U.S. adult population is diabetic. That's 19,300,000 people. 26% of the U.S. adult population are at risk for diabetes. That's 54 million people. 15.5% of American Indian adults has diabetes. This is far more prevalent in the Southwest than especially with the Pueblos Indians. Uh, some of them have diabetes that ranges 80% of the population. 15.5% of American Indians have diabetes. 10% of African American adults have diabetes. 6.5% of Mexican American adults has diabetes, and 5.6% of white adults has diabetes. It's kind of interesting when we're talking about Hispanic Americans. We should be talking about people from different places. Puerto Ricans, of course, hate to be called Mexicans, but the reality is that Puerto Ricans there is black ancestry in Puerto Rico, but most of it is Spanish ancestry in Puerto Rico. So they tend to be closer their racial structure is more white than it is anything else. People from Mexico, their racial structure tends to be more American Indian than anything else. Not so many Spanish down there. 5.6% of white adults has diabetes, as you can see. Um, Different groups have much, much higher. Uh, American Indians have 3 times as much diabetes as we see in the white population. It is not uncommon for someone with an eating disorder to have a co-occurring disorder as well. 12 to 18% of anorexics abuse tobacco, alcohol, amphetamines, prescription drugs, or over-the-counter substances. 30 to 70% of bulimics abuse tobacco, alcohol, amphetamines, prescription drugs, or over-the-counter substances. Most eating disorders begin during adolescence. They tend to be chronic and affect women more than men. 3% of women suffer from one of the 3 eating disorders. In high school, 33% of the girls and 16% of the boys show symptoms of one of the eating disorders. On your right, we have that's Snooki Polizzi, I guess is her name. Anyway, she was on Jersey Shores. She was the short girl. I think she's 4'8". She's about the size of my mother. But as you can see, she's very, very slender. What she looked like in the show was the lady on the left. And she was very, very popular because she was sexy and she was smart. She was smart mouth and whatnot. But after the show was over with, she decided she needed to lose weight, and that's what she looked like. This is what she looked like after the show was over with. Now you decide which looks better, the woman on the left or the woman on the right. They don't look like the same person, but they are. They are the same Snooki. Here she's a little bit paunchy. She's a little bit chunky, but she certainly looks better than this lady over here. I think so, anyway. I guess I don't know. Which one is healthier? This is healthier. It's healthier to have a little bit of extra weight than it is to have no extra weight whatsoever. One of the frightening statistics dealing with anorexia is the age of onset has dropped from 13 years to 9 years. Third grade girls are starting to diet and starve themselves to look thin. Anorexics seem to have a fear of gaining weight. These individuals tend to have a tendency to perfectionism and a low self-esteem. Death rates for anorexics range from 4 to 20%. That's really, really high because most mental illnesses do not cause you to die or make you want to die. But people who are anorexic do die, and the reason they die, well, I'm going to tell you in just a second why they die, but it just seems silly to me to have this compulsive desire to be slender, and of course then you have all these medical problems afterwards. Bulimia nervosa is a disorder characterized by binge eating and the obsessively ridding oneself of the food that has been eaten. You do this by vomiting. Sometimes they take laxatives. Audrey Hepburn, the famous actress with the very long, slender neck, that was her favorite method of ridding herself of excess weight, was by taking laxatives. And eventually she died of colon cancer because she overutilized her digestive system. By taking diuretics and excessive exercise are other ways of getting rid of the weight. Bulimia actually means ox hunger, as in hungry enough to eat an ox. When binging, these individuals eat as if they were famished to the point of uncomfortably distending their stomachs. These individuals are notorious for eating and purging in secret. A bulimic will often have a secret stash of forbidden food stashed away throughout their house that they can eat in private and purge quickly. Much of the cause of bulimia in particular, and eating disorders in general, stems from perceptions of acceptable appearance for females on television. When television was introduced to Fiji, 3% of the women on the island vomited to stay slender. 3 years later, the percentage of vomiters had gone up by 5 times to 15%. Fashion models maintain a body weight 13 to 19% below that of the women that they are modeling the clothes for. So the reality is that the women that we see in the magazines, the women we see on television, these individuals are not normal. This is not the normal way of looking. This lady is slender. She's overly slender. You can see her pelvic bones sticking out. This is not normal. Snooky, there we are. That is not normal. The lady on the right is not normal. You can see she has no muscle mass whatsoever. Her breasts have gone away. She has no hips. Her thighs are gone. The structure of her face has changed. While binging and purging may occur millions of times a week around the United States, it is not without its negative effects. Dental complications because of the acid from the vomit, greater possibility of alcohol abuse, greater possibility of drug abuse, high rates of depression, greater risk of suicide, stomach acid burns to the esophagus and throat, loss of tooth enamel, heart problems such as arrhythmias, menstrual problems, and electrolyte imbalance. Binge eating disorder has become an international problem. For the first time in the history of humanity, there are as many people in the world who are overweight as those who are underweight. In the United States, where obesity is defined as more than 30 pounds over one's ideal weight, obesity has increased from 15% in 1980 to 33% in 2005. Binge eating disorders affect 4.6% of the population at large. Binge eating is eating until the individual is uncomfortably full. People tend to be eating in response to emotional states rather than to true hunger signals. These individuals tend to have frequent episodes of eating large quantities of food, feeling a lack of control where food is concerned, eating rapidly and swallowing food without chewing, eating despite being uncomfortably full, eating when not fully hungry, eating away from others so that they won't see your volume of intake, feeling disgusted because of the lack of control of food, having a preference for high carbohydrates and foods with high fat content, junk food like potato chips or Little Debbie, anything made by Little Debbie. What's wrong with that lady, Little Debbie? Binge and compulsive eaters do not seem to know how to pace themselves, eating rapidly and in massive amounts until they feel painfully uncomfortable. The reality is the faster that you eat, then you have no clue as to whether you are satiated or not. It takes about 20 minutes after you have consumed your food before the area of your brain that tells you that you're satiated actually kicks in. So you can, if you're eating very, very rapidly, then what will happen is that you'll take in more food than you really need. So after 20 minutes of your stomach being full, and of course you've eaten more food, now you feel uncomfortably and painfully full. Such eating may be done to control anxiety. Food seems to have a calming and sedating effect on some people, Adolescents who eat when they are depressed are twice as likely to suffer from obesity or bulimia. They are also twice as likely to suffer from anorexia. Compulsive overeaters are more likely to suffer from high blood pressure, high cholesterol, circulatory problems, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. Remember, there are 15 million Americans who have type 2 diabetes, to suffer from sleep apnea, gallbladder disease, gout, arthritis, 15 to 60% greater risk of cancer. They exhibit high rates of depression, they become distressed and develop a negative body image. They allow their self-esteem to suffer badly. Now you may wonder, why in the world would cancer have anything to do with compulsive overeating? And the answer is it has to do with the fats. Remember the saturated fats? The fats that you take in, oh, I guess this is another class, I'm sorry. The fats that you take in can do a lot of damage to your body. Luckily, we have two types of cholesterol in our body, LDL and HDL. HDL cleans out the LDL. So if you take in these too much animal fats, the saturated fats, then you're more likely to develop cancer, more likely to develop prostate cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, and ovarian cancer. As weird as, yeah, I said breast cancer. Anyway, so it has to do with the fats. They're creating free radicals, and of course those free radicals need to be taken, need to be blocked by antioxidants. So if you're not eating a healthy diet, if you're not eating consuming antioxidants at the same time you're taking in your saturated fats, now you got a problem. Sexual addiction is marked by sexual behavior that the individual has little control over and little choice. This type of behavior might be practiced by young or old, gay or straight, and male or female. But usually it's male. The addiction not only includes sexual contact with another individual, but arousal through masturbation, viewing pornography, serial affairs, phone sex, visits to topless bars, and visits to strip shows. Sometimes sexual addiction can involve illegal activity, such as prostitution, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, exhibitionism, child molestation, rape, and potentially incest. By 2007, there were over 4 million pornographic sites on the internet. I thought, well, geez, I need to look this up and make sure it's what it is today. And when I looked it up, it was 4.5 million pornographic sites on the internet. That is, as of right now, 4.5 million. So it hasn't really changed that much. 40 million Americans visit these sites regularly. 70% of the visits are during work hours. 10% of the people surfing the porno sites are addicted to online pornography, and they spend up to 8 hours a day viewing sexual material. Can you imagine? My goodness gracious. Sorry. Just getting a drink. Worldwide, the pornography industry clears $57 billion a year. Look that figure up as well, and that figure is pretty close to what it is. They said 60 billion. In the United States, the pornographic industry clears $12 billion a year. Much of the pornography, as weird as this sounds, is filmed and photographed in the San Fernando Valley outside of Los Angeles. My son was living in, where was he living? Northridge, California, which is just north of Los Angeles. His next door neighbor was a producer of pornography. It was a female. She didn't make pornographic movies for females. She made them for males. One of his best friends was another female. She was a director of pornographic movies. I thought it was the oddest thing in the world. She was a really nice lady. She had been in film school, and this was the only job that she could find. really kind of odd. When he first told me what she did, I was a little surprised. But of course, he didn't have anything to do with it. He just had neighbors and friends and whatnot in the pornographic industry. 3 to 6% of U.S. population are sex addicts. 80% of sex addicts are male. As I said before, sexual addiction usually starts in the teen years and then peaks between ages 20 to 40, after which it slowly declines. Sexual addicts seem to suffer from other addictions in conjunction with the sexual problem. The DSM-5 identifies several paraphilias. Exhibitionism, where somebody gets a sexual charge out of displaying themselves, their naked parts, their naked sexual parts, to other individuals. Usually, it's they do it for the shock value, and that's how they get off. Fetishism, and of course, there's tons of different fetishes. Freucherism, which is rubbing against another individual. Pedophilia, which is having some kind of sexual contact with a child. Sexual masochism, where the individual gets pleasure from being tortured by another individual. Sexual sadism, where the individual gets sexual pleasure out of torturing another individual. I guess that was what 50 Shades of Grey was about. Transvestic fetishism, where they get they get sexual gratification from wearing the other gender's clothes. And voyeurism, where they get sexual gratification from viewing other individuals in sexual situations, or just viewing them when they're disrobed. Other sexual addictions include love addiction, the desire to fall in love and be in love. Relationship addiction, the need to be in a relationship with an individual. This may mean maintaining multiple relationships at any one time. Individuals suffering from any sexual addiction maintain little, if any, control over their behavior despite adverse consequences. The individual will continue to obsess over the behavior to the distraction of everything else. Compulsive sexual behavior is repeated because of the release of the pleasure-inducing neurotransmitters dopamine, enkephalin, and endorphin. And you may say, wait a minute, endorphins and enkephalins are released to block pain. And the reality is that that's what happens during sexual intercourse. You get endorphins and enkephalins being released. It's slamming of two bodies together. So you can imagine there could be some pain and some injury, depending on, there's lots of ways of looking at this. Anyway, so the fact that the pain goes away is part of the gratification. Tolerance to these neurotransmitters leads to a need for the addict to spend more and more time in their sexual activity to gain the same mental benefits. Damage can be done to careers, to their relationships, to their self-image, and to their peace of mind. Sexual addiction becomes the driving force in the addict's life. Part of the drive for the addict may be the risk that they are taking to achieve their target behavior. Usually the addict will culminate the behavior through orgasm, though in some cases it may involve exposure or fondling. The trigger behavior is often followed by remorse, guilt, fear of discovery, resolution to stop the behavior. The sexual behavior is often pursued with a sense of desperation, self-loathing, despair, and low self-image. Internet addicts seem to have no control over their need to log on. While the internet didn't really begin until 1993, today 4.5 billion people worldwide out of 7 billion are connected to the internet, and that I looked up today as well. 15 to 20% of the 1 billion have high-speed connections. In Canada and the United States, 2/3 of the populations are connected to the internet. The three main uses of internet are gaming, seeking erotic material, and gambling. The internet is anonymous. The reason people like it is because it's anonymous, it's inexpensive, it's controlled by the user, it's validating, it's rewarding, it's convenient, and it's escapist. Symptoms of internet addiction include logging on at every chance at home or at work. Non-addicts log on an average of 8 hours a week. Addicts may log on 40 plus hours a week. Obsessing about the internet, feeling irritable and anxious when not online. Time online increases to make the individual feel they have had enough. Losing track of time when online. Neglecting responsibilities to be online. Allowing relationships to deteriorate with spouses, coworkers, family, and friends, posting more messages and downloading more and more data, eating in front of the monitor, checking email frequently, more than once a day. Of course, people check their email constantly, but are they obsessed? Well, that's a good question. Some internet addicts seek oblivion, wanting to zone out, while others seek frequent or constant interaction. Physical symptoms of internet overuse include blurred vision, chronic lack of sleep, twitching mouse fingers, relationship problems. The list of internet addictions includes cybersexual addiction, computer relationship addiction, internet compulsions, information addiction, computer games addiction. We can talk about catfishing and trolling. Those are two ways that people go on the internet to bully people, as weird as that may seem. Computer relationship addiction entails individuals dealing more and more in their online fantasy world. They pull more and more away from the real relationships until they lose them. Eventually, the addict's cyber world replaces and becomes the most important aspect of their life. For online gamers, the game might start offline, and then as they improve, they need the competition of the online games. Like any other online addiction, gamers lose track of time while they are playing. Some gamers will spend every free moment gaming. Men, teenagers, and children play online more than any other groups, whereas non-addicts will spend 20 to 60 minutes playing a game. A gamer will average 6 hours a day in their games. For the last 60 years, the most frightening non-substance addiction was television addiction. TV addicts may easily spend 6 to 8 hours a day watching. 60% of American homes contain 3 or more televisions. In many American homes, the television is on longer than their lights are on. The benchmarks for TV addiction: compulsive use, making the individual a couch potato, using television to change one's mood, sedative, using it as a sedative or antidepressant, craving use, loss of control, continued use despite adverse consequences, development of tolerance. The average adolescent watches TV for 1,500 hours a year as compared to 900 hours of school. So they watch almost twice as much television as time that they spend in school. The shows that an addict watches skews how they see reality and leads them to make poor decisions. Since television shows dysfunction as normal, adolescents have a hard time accepting their own culture as real. Commercials for fast food may lead to compulsive fatty food consumption. News focus on negative events leads the individual to skew towards seeing the world as an especially dangerous place. A study in New Zealand showed that the more the child watched television between the ages of 5 and 15, the less likely they were to graduate from high school or to go to college. There are over 200 million cell phone users in the United States. Probably there's a lot more than that now. There are over 6 billion cell phone users around the world. Calling and texting takes up a large part of a teenager's day, to the exclusion of studying or engaging in face-to-face relationships. And that is the end of this chapter. This is all I'm going to do this week. So you're just going to have the one video for this week. Next week we will tackle chapter 8, and if I can do it all in one blast, then I will try to do that. Well, maybe not all of chapter 8. Anyway, this is the end of today's lecture, and this is the end of the lecture for the week. I'll see you again next week. Have a good time. Stay safe. Shelter in wherever you are. and don't go out as little as possible. So I'll see you guys next week.